I'm Casey Claiborne, and thanks for watching this CrimeWatch YouTube exclusive. This week's special episode is covering the murder trial of Army Sgt. Daniel Perry. The trial ended with a jury finding Perry guilty of murder in the death of Black Lives Matter protester Garrett Foster on July 25, 2020. Now, 24 hours after the verdict, Governor Abbott asked for a pardon. And now Perry's defense team is calling for a new trial. Let's take a look back at the specifics of what happened with coverage from Fox 7 Austin's Amanda Ruiz, who was in the courtroom. First, let's go back to September 2020, about 2 months after Garrett Foster's death. Fox 7 Austin spoke with his family. At the time, charges were still pending, and it wasn't until July 2021 before Perry was indicted on murder and aggravated assault charges. An affidavit was filed with claims of witness tampering, but in August 2021, a judge dismissed those claims and the trial was allowed to move forward. Jury selection for the trial began on March 27th of this year.
A deadly incident caught on live stream from the night of July 25th, 2020. An incident that led to jury selection for a murder trial 3 years later. Army Sgt. Daniel Perry faces life in prison for what happened that night. In the summer of 2020, Black Lives Matter protests were in full swing, a demonstration taking over the streets of Austin almost every day. July 25th was no exception. Garrett Foster, who was legally carrying an AK-47, and his fiancée were participating in the protest that day, a protest that was headed down Congress Avenue on foot. During the same time and while working for Uber, Sgt. Daniel Perry turned from 4th Street onto Congress Avenue and drove into that crowd of protesters. An encounter that led Perry to shoot off several shots, killing Garrett Foster. Perry claims it was self-defense. He claims Foster approached him and raised his rifle at him, which led Perry to shoot off his own gun.
The rifle was starting to be raised. I certainly saw some pictures that appeared to bear that out. And my client saw it, which is probably the most important thing, and that's something he's trained in, as an Army soldier.
Protesters there claim that just wasn't true. They say Perry aggressively drove through the crowd, honking his horn, and Foster did not raise his rifle. Foster's family told Fox 7 Austin back in 2020 they agree with those protesters.
He was there with malicious intent. And you don't get away with something like that.
Now a jury will decide, a decision the Foster family has been waiting for 3 years.
More than anything, I want this man behind bars. I don't think that it's right that you can shoot somebody in the street and walk away from it. I personally think the self-defense claim that he's using isn't accurate at all.
On March 28th, the courtroom was packed as opening statements and witness testimony began. Perry maintained his plea of not guilty.
It was the first day of trial of testimony for the murder trial of Daniel Perry. It began with Perry declaring his innocence in the July 25th, 2020 shooting.
Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, Your Honor. The court accepts your plea of not guilty.
It then moved to opening statements. First up, the state speaking directly to the jury, explaining Perry intentionally instigated what happened that night.
The evidence will show that Perry is the person who instigated the events that night. Through his unreasonable actions and his conduct, and in fact Perry who engaged in the unlawful use of force by driving his car into the protest march.
The defense was up next. They say Perry shot and killed Foster in self-defense.
And he believed he had no choice, regrettably, but he had no choice. He was in apparent danger of being killed, 0.2 of 1 second. He had no choice but to use his gun to defend himself. And that's why he carried the gun in the Uber.
Witnesses were up next. First, a 25-year-old independent videographer who was live streaming the day of the incident. He was able to catch Perry's vehicle as he drove into the crowd and the gunshots that followed.
I was prepared with the first aid kit, and my instant reaction was to run towards, where I thought the person had been ran over in order to render aid. So as if shots were being fired, for myself, I ran to take cover. I was under the assumption that we were experiencing a mass shooting.
The witness told the jury he did not see where the gunfire came from. When asked by the defense about an incident with protesters in October of 2020, a back and forth ensued.
I do want to point out, if I can, that the protesters present that day were different groups. They're unrelated.
Sir, let me try. Hold on.
Only one.
Hold on. One at a time.
Next witness, a rideshare driver. His dash cam footage was presented as evidence, catching part of the incident.
And so this vehicle here is now making a right turn onto Congress. Is that correct?
Correct.
In his testimony, the witness did mention he made a 911 call about a man holding a rifle before the incident occurred. He said he was scared for his safety.
It was chaos. I mean, it was pandemonium. People running everywhere, and I was more concerned about my safety, getting myself out of there before I was worried about where everybody was going.
It was an emotional second day of witness testimony as the jury was presented with messages posted and sent by Perry. The jury also heard from Foster's wife, Whitney Mitchell, who talked about what she said happened the night Foster was killed.
Whitney Mitchell, a quadruple amputee, was the first to take the stand Wednesday morning.
Who was Garrett Foster?
He was my husband.
A testimony which made her very emotional to recall.
You need a minute? Are you okay? You sure?
She says the night of July 25th, 2020, their close friend Jeremy Lett was pushing her in her wheelchair during the protests, something her husband usually did but couldn't that night because he had his rifle slung across his chest. Once the protest got to 4th and Congress, she remembers seeing a car coming at her and Foster jumping in front of her, telling the driver to move on.
And all I remember is hearing gunshots and Garrett just falling over in front of me, and then the car sped off.
The debate remains, why were those deadly shots fired by Perry? The state and the defense asked witnesses to clarify, how was Foster holding his rifle?
Across his chest. He had it slinged across the front and would always be holding it downward.
The defense provided a mock rifle to witness and close friend Jeremy Lett to show how he remembers Foster holding it.
When he came up to the car, it was about...
I'm not talking about when he came up to the car. I'm talking about when he was 50 to 100 feet away from the car.
Okay, well, pretty much all times.
Based on that, the defense demonstrated how Foster could have looked walking up to the car.
How walking up to the car?
A demonstration that caused Foster's family to call out in shock from the front row of the courtroom.
That was a very terrible impression of how Garrett walked.
The defense questioned Lett's validity since he admitted to lying to the DA's office about his actions that night, kicking the car when it drove past him.
And it was important to tell him the truth. He lied to him.
That's correct.
A majority of the witnesses who testified were protesters that were there the night Garrett Foster was shot. Thursday morning marked day 3 of witness testimony.
Well, I think part of what I'm feeling is I don't really want to be the reason that someone goes to prison.
Testimony in the murder trial of Daniel Perry, who was accused of killing protester Garrett Foster in 2020.
I saw him reach over onto his right side and lift what I saw to be the silhouette of a gun, of a handgun. And as he moved that handgun to point it towards the group of people who had approached his driver's side door, the window was rolling down on his driver's side. I then saw and heard 3 shots fired.
A different witness there that night explained how he remembered Perry's face moments before firing those deadly shots.
Anger was the best I could use to describe that expression.
Defense is claiming Perry shot Foster in self-defense. The state says it was intentional. The same witness mentioned Foster was holding his rifle in a low ready position. Photos of how he demonstrated it in previous interviews were shared with the jury.
That was a part of the demonstration, yes.
Demonstration of how Garrett Foster held the rifle that night.
Yes.
Haven Trahan, a protester there that night, was called to the stand.
So he leans in, and this is where he gives his challenge.
He demonstrated how he believes Foster had his rifle slung down when he approached the driver's side of the car. He says Foster yelled, "Get out of the car or keep moving." The defense says he told detectives that Foster just said, "Get out of the car."
The window starts rolling down, and he stands up, and then a revolver comes all the way out. A revolver in that hand and then an elbow. Comes all the way out, a right hand, points straight at Garrett's face, No words are spoken, and starts shooting. And I watched 3 shots.
Another witness called to the stand was Nico Daisy, a protester there that night who says he heard those shots.
Shots rang out from the car into the crowd, and screaming ensued.
He says he fired 3 shots of his own after the car when it drove away from the crowd of protesters.
I had the split second to make a decision, and the car posed a threat to an unknown threat.
Daisy says he did it so the car could be identified later by police, the state presenting that pistol used by Daisy.
Does that appear to be the pistol you carried?
I would believe so, yes.
Daisy also revealed he was one of the first to render aid to Foster. Photo evidence of him rendering aid with a police officer were also shown.
To check for a pulse. I did not feel a pulse on Mr. Foster. Me and the APD officers began to assess what we were dealing with. I produced a pocket knife, at which point we used to cut off Garrett's clothing. Initially we found 3 bullet wounds.
On the 4th day of the trial, Perry's 911 calls after shooting Foster and police officer body-worn camera video was shown to the jury.
I made a wrong turn and I've never had to shoot somebody before.
The 911 call Daniel Perry made moments after he shot Garrett Foster.
There was smashing my window. The guy pointed the weapon at me and I panicked. I didn't know what to do.
For the first time, body cam footage showcasing police's first encounter with Perry was shown.
He was visibly distraught. I remember his hands were shaking. In speaking with him, I could hear the quiver or nervousness in his voice.
Former APD officer Joshua VC was one of the first officers to encounter Perry after the shooting.
It was obvious that he'd just been involved in a traumatic incident.
Just calm down. All right, just calm down, okay?
Perry told Officer VC protesters attacked his car when he claimed he accidentally turned into the crowd of protesters.
I found evidence, at least what I suspected is initial evidence, that there was some kind of attack on this vehicle. It looked like there were many handprints. There looked to be like boot or kick marks along the vehicle. And then I observed what I felt was, at the time, 2 bullet holes in the vehicle.
Perry told police he was more focused on the weapon than the face of the person he shot. He explained he rolled down his window because he thought the man was going to speak to him.
I didn't know where he was going to do the weapon, you know. I saw as it coming up.
Officer VC says he didn't know Foster personally, but he made the connection because police had been made aware of Foster and his rifle previously.
Did you believe that Garrett Foster was the primary aggressor?
Yes.
Dr. Jennifer Durkinson with the Travis County Medical Examiner's Office was the one to conduct Garrett Foster's autopsy the day after the incident. She said he had a total of 4 gunshot wounds.
He had one here to the right side of the chest with an exit wound at the right arm, upper arm. He had another one here at the left lateral chest that entered into the body and left a bullet. And he had another one at the left upper arm, which also ultimately entered the torso of the body and left a bullet.
And based on the placement of those wounds,
most likely Mr. Foster was leaning towards the left, so like so.
Like that, right?
Mm-hmm. That make it more likely, particularly if someone is seated in a car.
On the 5th day of the trial, the entirety of Perry's police interview following the shooting was shown.
I know this is a really stressful time. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, he's dead. Oh God.
footage of Daniel Perry's police interview after he killed Garrett Foster was played in the courtroom during his murder trial. Former Austin Police Homicide Detective David Fugit was the one to conduct the interview with Perry. In it, Detective Fugit had Perry demonstrate how Foster carried his rifle.
How high did that barrel come up? We're not worried about right now. Okay, was it aimed at you? I believe it was aimed at me. I believe he was going to aim it at me. I didn't want to give him a chance to aim at me, you know?
And then what Perry did while he was sitting in the driver's seat.
That quick, yeah. It's like a thing within a restaurant. I don't want to be shot, so.
Perry said he shot 5 times. He believes the whole encounter was less than 15 seconds.
Where did you shoot it? Where did you shoot it? Not masked.
Sometime after the interview, Perry called Detective Fugit to find out more information for his lawyer, reiterating that he was scared but, quote, felt bad.
He was a person. I feel bad, I just wish to tell it differently, I honestly did not want him to die. All I wanted to do was to incapacitate him.
Day 6 of Perry's murder trial included testimony from a forensic engineer who created a 3D rendering of the July 2020 incident.
Through a laser scan of 4th and Congress, Jason Evans, a forensic engineer, was able to create a 3D rendering of 4th and Congress. And through a series of 5 photos and videos taken the night of July 25, 2020, he created a recreation of the incident, starting with Perry turning into the crowd of protesters.
Mr. Perry starts off initially at 11.9 miles per hour, starts to deaccelerate or slow down to the apex of the turn to 9.8 miles per hour, and then continues to slow down until he comes to a stop.
Evans was also able to give a rendering of how close Foster might have been standing to Perry's driver's side door before Perry shot and killed him.
We were able to show and accurately know that at a tenth of a second before the first shot fired, that Mr. Foster was 18 inches from the driver's door.
And also how Perry might have seen Foster through his driver's side door. This part of the analysis based on one cell phone video from that night.
We were ultimately able to show that you were able to see Mr. Foster from the area of his mid-thigh all the way to the top of his head.
The state argued this analysis, mentioning Foster looks like he's almost fully upright when at Perry's window, when previous testimony from the medical examiner who performed Foster's autopsy claimed otherwise based on his gunshot wounds.
If I told you that there was testimony before this jury that the trajectory of Mr. Foster's wounds were all downward, going across his body in a downward, would that change your analysis in any way?
Again, we didn't do any trajectory analysis.
The state also questioned Evans' analysis of how close Foster was standing if a video from that night shows he's moving when the first muzzle flash goes off.
I know in our analysis we determined that frame from our 20-second clip showed both of his feet on the ground in that one frame.
A response that resulted a back and forth.
If you're going to ask me an opinion about a video, I need to understand.
Excuse me, one at a time.
In the end, Evans stood by his analysis, claiming he was extremely confident in the accuracy of his testimony.
Yes, there is some error associated with this, but there is not a basic quantified calculation to give you an exact measurement.
As the trial hit the 1-week mark, the final witness testified. A former Austin police homicide detective who was the lead on the case was called to the stand.
On day 7 of Daniel Perry's murder trial, the defense called former Austin police homicide detective David Fugit to the stand, the final witness for this trial.
I investigated 68 homicides as an investigator during my career. Out of 68 homicides, I solved 64.
He was the lead detective in Perry's case after he shot and killed Black Lives Matter protester Garrett Foster the night of July 25, 2020.
Did you arrest Daniel Perry?
No.
Why not?
Because there was legitimate argument for self-defense.
During his testimony, he continuously referred to his 900-page police report. He told the jury he believed Garrett Foster was in a bladed tactical stance when outside Perry's car door.
So if he's in a bladed stance like this and he's taking the rounds on, you're going to expect to find them on the left side. It's much different than if he was standing at the door like this and these rounds went through and through. They'd be from front to back.
At one point, the state piped up during the defense's line of questioning.
Hey, wait a minute. Judge, objection.
Sustained. Sustained.
The judge says the defense asked a question they were specifically asked not to. The judge asking the jury to disregard that part of the testimony. Testimony in regard to potential charges against previous witness Nico Daisy, who shot after Perry's car the night of the incident.
This line of questioning is irrelevant, has nothing to do with this trial.
In the end, the state had the chance to cross-examine Fugit, one question sticking out in a packed courtroom.
But you have been wrong on homicide cases before, haven't you?
I have, yes.
Closing arguments happened on April 6th. The jury deliberated for nearly 16 hours and found Perry guilty of murder in the death of Foster. Perry was found not guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
In a packed courtroom, the final moments before the jury began deliberations.
In count 1 with the offense of murder, And in count 2 with the offense of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
But before deliberations, each side had one more chance to sway the jury. The state,
Daniel Perry was not legally justified in using deadly force against Garrett Foster.
Versus the defense.
Legitimate self-defense. Daniel Perry had 0.2 of a second to decide what he had to do.
Attorney Libby Lawson with the state reminded the jury of past posts and messages made by Perry months before the incident.
I'll only shoot the ones in the front and push the pedal to the metal.
Specifically messages made by Perry to his childhood friend, referencing incidents involving shooting protesters to see if those shots were justified.
These conversations with Michael Holcomb are starting to look like a playbook for what you would do if you wanted to use force in these situations.
The defense taking a much different approach, asking the jury to imagine themselves in Perry's shoes the night of the incident.
Close your eyes and picture that. And as you're picturing that, picture this.
Clint Broden with the defense attempting to replicate what a kick to Perry's door might have sounded like from a protester. He also took time to remind the jury how other witnesses testified Foster and his rifle.
1, 2, 3 different people have that rifle almost parallel to the ground.
Defense attorney Doug O'Connell comparing Foster and Perry's clothing that night.
So here's Garrett. He's looking to get in a fight.
State Attorney Guillermo Gonzalez reminded the jury Perry ran a red light that night when he turned into a crowd of protesters, reiterating this could have been avoided if he just stopped.
You know why we're all here? Because he decided to blow a red light, shot him 5 times, shot him dead, because he couldn't stop for a red light.
After 16 hours of deliberation, the jury has found Daniel Perry guilty of murder, a verdict that came to a shock to both sides sitting in the courtroom. After nearly 16 hours of deliberation, the jury had reached a verdict in the murder trial of Daniel Perry.
We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Perry guilty of the offense of murder as alleged in count 1 of the indictment. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Perry not guilty of the offense of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon as alleged in count 2.
A verdict that filled the courtroom with emotion.
Jury number 10, is that your verdict?
Yes, sir.
The family of Garrett Foster, sitting in the front row, couldn't help but cry tears of joy, hugging the state attorneys for the work they did.
We're happy with the verdict. We are very sorry for his family as well. There's no winners in this.
But on the other side of the courtroom, Daniel Perry's family in shock, crying over the fact that he had just been convicted of murder for killing protester Garrett Foster in 2020. Perry himself unable to hide his emotion, hugging his attorney as he cried.
State, is there a motion?
The state wasting no time.
Jury, I'm asking the defendant be remanded into custody at this point.
Perry was turned over into the custody of the Travis County Sheriff's Office, handcuffed instantly.
After the guilty verdict was announced, Texas Governor Greg Abbott weighed in. Abbott said he has requested the Board of Pardons and Parole to look into Perry's conviction and determine if Perry should be granted a pardon.
We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Perry guilty.
Less than 24 hours after Daniel Perry was convicted of murder in the shooting death of 28-year-old Garrett Foster nearly 3 years ago, Governor Abbott says he is working as fast as Texas law allows to look into a pardon for the former Army Sergeant. In a statement Saturday afternoon, Abbott saying, quote, Texas has one of the strongest stand-your-ground laws of self-defense that cannot be nullified by a jury or a progressive district attorney, clearly referring to Travis County DA Jose Garza.
Jury number 10, is that your verdict?
Yes, sir.
Jurors reached their verdict Friday after nearly 16 hours of deliberations. Their focus, whether Perry acted intentionally or in self-defense the night of July 25th, 2020. Perry was driving for Uber when police say he drove into a Black Lives Matter protest, encountered Foster, who was carrying an AK-47 rifle, and shot him 5 times.
We're happy with the verdict. We are very sorry for his family as well.
But Governor Abbott clearly not happy with the verdict, noting Saturday Texas law does allow the governor to request the Board of Pardons and Paroles to determine if a person should be granted a pardon. I have made that request and instructed the board to expedite its review. I look forward to approving the board's pardon recommendation as soon as it hits my desk.
Perry's defense team is now asking for a new trial. A nearly 30-page motion says key evidence was withheld from the jury.
4 days after Daniel Perry was convicted by a jury of murder for killing protester Garrett Foster, his defense team called for a new trial.
They alleged that there were errors in the conduct of the trial that warrant the verdict being thrown out and Daniel Perry getting a new trial.
The 26-page motion reads key evidence was withheld from the jury, including a series of photos taken from protests before the incident that claim Foster used his fiance's wheelchair to block cars. The defense says evidence like this could have shown the jury these protests were not peaceful and Foster was trying to intimidate people. Rick Kofer, a criminal defense attorney, doesn't think these claims will warrant a new trial.
That claim is unlikely to be successful because the judge is not going to decide that he was wrong earlier with his rulings, and more than likely the judge was correct in his rulings.
However, Kofer says the next claim listed in the motion could be a little more successful in getting Perry a new trial, and that's jury misconduct.
First, it's alleged that one of the jurors brought outside information about the law concerning self-defense into the jury room in terms of conversation.
According to the motion, a juror printed out information at home during an overnight break and showed it to other jurors. The defense also claims an alternate juror who acts as a backup juror in case one of the other 12 members cannot fulfill their duties participated in deliberations when they weren't supposed to. The motion says the alternate juror didn't actually speak during deliberations, but did snort, huff, gasp, and make other noises expressing displeasure with certain comments made.
Those claims mean that there's sizzle, there's smoke, but the judge will determine whether or not there's really meat on the table, and then he'll decide whether to grant a new trial or not.
The Travis County District Attorney's Office released this statement to Fox 7 Austin on the motion, saying in part, these motions are standard. We applaud the defense team for making use of procedural safeguards that are available. However, we continue to stand by the jury's unanimous decision to convict Daniel Perry for the murder of Garrett Foster. A decision that isn't by any means unexpected, but according to Kofer, he says it's definitely surprising, since Perry is being considered for a pardon by the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles.
That might be an example of being safe with belt and suspenders, or it could mean that there are concerns the pardon may not go through.
Perry's sentencing is still expected to happen, but a date has not yet been set. Thanks for watching this special edition of Fox 7 Austin's Crime Watch. Our exclusive Crime Watch stories run each Monday on Fox 7 Austin News at 9. To see all of the coverage on this trial, look for the links below the video. You can also head to our website, fox7austin.com, or subscribe to the Fox 7 Austin YouTube channel.